If you're trying to go from wherever you're at to really awesome cups of coffee, I would generally recommend get a nice gram scale, get a nice grinder, get a good French press, and find a bag of whole bean coffee that you enjoy. And you're probably into that, probably about $250. And you can now make coffee that's on par with pretty much any local coffee establishment.
Welcome to Work is Good, a CSM podcast. My name is Landon Buteau, and I host the show with my dad, Chris Buteau, the owner and president at CSM. Today's conversation is with Philip Meech, the owner and founder at Cafe Luso, and it's the first of a series about coffee. And Philip's just going to walk us through some basic questions around coffee to help us understand it better in this series. And these episodes will drop on a bi-weekly basis. And we're really excited to learn more about coffee with Philip. And today's conversation specifically is about the basic recipe for doing coffee right at home. How much time and money do you need to put into your operation to get to the level where you know you're doing it right, you know you're doing it well, but you're also not going overboard. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Well, thanks for having me back. The last episode was a whole lot of fun, and I really enjoy this because I just like talking about coffee more than almost anything. So getting into some of the technicals here, people might have some questions about what are some essentials for brewing at home if you're maybe starting from zero, or maybe just want to upgrade some of the different components you need. So we have this background framework. If you look in our logo, in our crest, you'll see 4 M's, the letter M, on a banner. And that is not something we came up with, but we're hoping to repopularize the thought of it. Each one of those M's stands for one of the critical pillars of a good coffee. And this is sort of old Italian doctrine and dogma. It's been, for decades. And so each of those 4 M's stands for an Italian word. The first one is la macchina, or the machine. The second one is macinatura, or the grinder mill. The third one is miscela, which is your blend, your coffee, your recipe, if it's a single origin, light roast, dark roast, whatever it is. And the last one is mano, which is sort of the hand that prepares and orchestrates everything. So those are our guideposts. And within each category, there's settings. So under La Macchina for the machine, there would be things like water temperature, water purity, the pressure, the volume.
Right.
That sort of thing.
It's not just the machine itself.
It's all the proper settings.
Sure.
Because the way you approach a great coffee program is you're looking for an orchestra, and each instrument in each section has to do its part, and it has to be coordinated so that there is order and composure to it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So the machine, is that just whatever you're brewing, whatever your tools are?
Yeah, great question. So the 4 M's are usually thought of in an espresso context, but really it's any coffee brewing methodology, because there's always some kind of a machine. That could be a French press, that could be a drip coffee brewer, that could be a AeroPress, that could be a Chemex, and it could certainly be an espresso machine. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So yeah, I think a really helpful takeaway that I personally want to take away is, okay, those are kind of the four elements that I have to be mindful of. How much as a just a make it at home coffee guy with enough interest to interview a guy on a podcast, but not much expertise, not much knowledge. How much time and money should I be putting into each element? What does that look like practically to do it well at home?
I would say if you're kind of starting out of the gate or resetting your home coffee program, maybe getting back to basics or something, you can get into a great setup for somewhere around $250, maybe $300. And within that, that's talking about the basic elements like a really nice French press. So you're going to be around probably $30 for that. So
French press seems like all French, like more than the other brewing methods. It just seems like that would be all. They're all the same. Is there variation in the quality within, in terms of the actual production quality?
I don't think there's a ton of variation as long as you have a good quality glass. I don't know if I would recommend metallic ones because if
Sure.
you see the insulated presses, and if you leave that in there for a long period of time, you're going to kind of get some extra extraction. You might pick up metallic flavors. Sometimes we joke around here that we like to call these the French press and pour, not the French press and store, because you want to close out your extraction and get that poured into the cups or into a thermos,
Sure.
like a glass insulated thermos of some sort. But outside of that, I don't think there's a great deal of variation other than build quality or aesthetic, but not functional to how well is it going to perform the extraction.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So basic, if you want to just do coffee basically well, a French press is a good direction to go.
It's a great starting place. They're very historical. Yeah. They're sort of timeless and classic. We like them because they are elegant and simple, and they offer a tremendous degree of control of the actual brewing cycle.
Okay. So how much, decent bottoms, what, like $30 for?
I'd say the range is probably 20 to 40, unless you get into the really custom stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about the beans? What am I spending on those?
Find a good local roaster that's got some nice fresh coffee where you can get to know their roasting, their house style, and let your palate explore the world of coffee. Right now in the US, really nice 12-ounce bags of specialty coffee that are well curated, well roasted, packed and sent to you fresh are going to be somewhere in the $15 to $25 range per bag.
Or what's a standard bag size? What is
12 ounce is probably the most common that you would see, especially grocery store. So we're not talking about like what might be 2-pound, 3-pound bags you might see at Costco, or ground coffee in a can that's on a bottom shelf somewhere in a store. But if you're talking about small batch roasted, high premium coffee, 12 ounces is the main size, and you're probably at your grocery store going to see 15 to 20. And if you're going direct to a roaster, you might see a little bit higher because they might not put their most limited offerings on a grocery store shelf.
Yeah. So if you have, I guess before getting to I was going to ask about like freshness, because we get Costco bags and we keep them in your Lusso vacuum container, which is great, but I'm sure that doesn't fully solve the problem. So I was going to ask about freshness, but before we get there, what are you, aside from getting from a local, regular coffee roaster, as opposed to, grocery store bottom shelf or Costco, what are basic things that you're looking for to be aware of?
Well, you probably, as you get to know a purveyor, especially if you're buying directly from a roaster, you have access to more information about where the coffee is from, and it might be a particular estate, it might be a processing method. You might find out more about how it was roasted and how it was designed to be brewed, which is sort of an important aspect when we get into talking about recipes and ratios. We don't really recommend per se that you treat all coffees the same, although that's not a bad place to start.
Yeah. I when you say don't treat all coffee the same, I immediately think of your videos that I'll see on Instagram that get into it. It just seems like I'm so far from even being able to track with all the nuances. So what is a basic don't treat all coffees the same to start with? What are some basic distinctions to be aware of?
To keep it simple, if you look at roast spectrum from light to medium to dark, there is a phenomenon about the solubility coefficient of coffee as you roast darker. In other words, you might say it's easier to extract from darker roasts. That doesn't mean you're going to like that flavor profile. That's an individual taste and preference thing.
Sure.
But we brew and encourage people to brew by brew ratio, which is the amount of coffee to amount of water. And the greatest way to control that is to have a little scale, like a gram scale. Some people already have them in their homes because they are passionate bakers, and you weigh things. You don't put flour into a 1 cup measurement. You need to know what the gram throw is.
Yeah.
So I'm holding one of those up in my hand right now, in fact, that we sell and that you can get online and from major retailers, and you might find those for $50 to $60. You can use them for lots of different things. And if that'll give you your gram weight of coffee. So we weigh the coffee. We also weigh the water. So in a French press, we might take a French press and put 50 grams of coffee in there, zero or tear the scale. And then if we're doing a 16-to-1 brew ratio, and we have 50 grams of coffee, then 16 divided by 50 would be 800. So 50 grams of coffee by weight, 800 grams of water, and 50 times 16, which is that ratio, gives you the 800.
Okay.
When you get into darker roasts, you might find that you prefer instead of a 1 to 16 ratio, you might find that you like a 1 to 18 ratio or a 1 to 20 ratio. If you get into really, really light roasts where you're tasting a lot of sort of candied citrus zest and lime and pomegranate and grapefruit and these sort of characteristics, you might be down to a 1 to 15, 1 to 14 ratio.
Okay.
So the darker the roast, on average, broad brushstroke, usually you can go with a bigger ratio.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. That makes sense. I think I just need to bite the bullet. Well, it's not much of a bullet, but I've known that weighing is a more precise measuring than my little coffee scoop. But because, you get a lot of variation day to day with that.
Sure.
I did, 6 scoops yesterday, 6 scoops today, but it tasted much better yesterday kind of thing.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of that inconsistency at home. People trying to figure out what's going on, why that is. And once you have your methodology down, scoops can work out just fine. The trick is if you're reading nomenclature online and you're thinking about your scoop and your cup, people used to come in and say, okay, how many scoops of this coffee do I use in my brewer, in my 10-cup brewer? Well, I don't know how big your scoop is. I don't know if it's 7 grams or 10 grams or 12 grams. I don't know, when you say 10 cup, is that an 8-ounce cup? So that's sort of like US volumetric, but internationally, a cup is closer to 5 ounces. In Denmark, it's 4. In Italy, it's 1. And in parts of Europe, it's 6. So it just depends how big your scoop and how many, when you say how many cups in your coffee brewer, it's really easy to weigh things and say it's this weight of coffee and this weight of water. Now I have a ratio. And then once you have that, go back to scooping, because now you know how many scoops you need given your scoop size.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So I do want to get to make sure we hit on all the M's, make sure we're not missing any there. But I am curious now. I'm looking at my coffee maker, and I've recently shifted from a pour over to just a drip, machine. Because I've gotten lazy, and it's nice to make the coffee the night before and have it set up. That way, when I wake up, it's ready to go. It's a nice feeling. And I could see sticking with that. But my question is, I have a glass pitcher that it drops into, which has the hot plate at the bottom. Is that just a hard stop? You would just recommend against that because it burns the coffee when it comes out?
Yeah, I mean, drip coffee brewers that feature a glass carafe on a heater plate, I'd say they're generally probably pretty good for the brew cycle. If it sits in there and people are wondering, like, why does the first cup taste the best? And I come back in half an hour and it's hot, but it doesn't taste the same. One of the things going on there is you've got quinic acid in coffee, and when you continue to force a reaction, i.e. put heat into the system, that's going to break down into quinide, which is a bitter component that people are more familiar. If I said to somebody like, hey, what's quinide? They might say, I don't know, I've never heard of it. Have you ever had tonic water? Quinide is what is used to create the bitterness in tonic water. And that is the same thing that shows up in coffee. So we don't recommend
Interesting.
having a setup where you take the quinic acid in coffee, convert it to quinine, and then get that flavor, which is usually not desirable.
Right. But that you're saying that primarily is only really impactful if it sits, like if just for the brew cycle. If you, because what we do is we, for the most part, we'll pour it into an insulated carafe right away.
That's what I would do, regardless of whether you're in a French press or a drip coffee or some other methodology. And if you're doing a batch of coffee and say you're at, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 ounces, 60 ounces or whatever it is, then a good insulated thermos is probably the way to go, and preferably glass lined. Some people are very sensitive to metallic characteristics.
Interesting.
So if you put your coffee into something that's stainless steel lined, 45 minutes later, you might notice it kind of has a little bit of a metallic flavor.
I see. Okay.
And some people are sensitive to it, and some people don't care. And some people, if you're putting enough cream and sugar or whatever else in your coffee, you just might not notice it. So somewhere in there, this is all about finding what your expectations are of your coffee.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so where did I interrupt you? I've kind of gone a little bit all over the place at this point with beans and tools. What else do we need to know for the basic recipe?
Let's talk about grinders. Getting a good grinder will be one of the things that sort of changes your world of great coffee at home. Coffee, like many things exposed to oxygen, breaks down. When you get ground coffee, your surface area is probably magnified something like 10,000%. So
interesting.
Pre-ground coffee oxidizes somewhat faster than coffee left in the whole bean form. And that's why almost everybody in the specialty coffee world is a pretty strong advocate of grinding right before you brew, or the night before you brew, or something besides every 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
Just for more enjoyable flavor. There's different types of grinders. There's 2 broad categories in the home market. One is called a blade grinder, which we sometimes refer to as a weed whacker. It's usually something that kind of spins around at a high really RPM, and it kind of hacks at the coffee. Yep. Versus a burr grinder, where you have a lot of granularity control as the coffee is sheared and flaked, and you get a cleaner exposure of the pores of the surface of the coffee. And so burr grinders are the way to go. They're way easier to control. They're much more consistent. They cost a little more. You can usually pick up a blade grinder for $20, and this Baratza Encore that I have on my desk right now is around 150. And for some people, that's
not as bad as I was expecting.
Yeah, it's not horrible. You can go crazy, and we have customers that are buying $2,000-$3,000 grinders for their house or more. And so you can go as deep as you want. But we're just talking about a really great starter kit where you have a huge gain in quality. And that's what I would do. Having said all that, so many of our customers have young kids, and even if a grinder only needs to be on for 20 seconds in the morning, at 5 or 6 a.m. or something, that can be a realistic, I get that, as a consideration, as you just don't want to bring that kind of noise that early in the morning.
Yep, that's fair. Yeah, I suppose somewhat of a simple solution is the night before, but how much of a difference does that, 8 hours make?
I wouldn't hesitate to. I would have no problem grinding coffee the night before, especially for a French press or drip coffee. Espresso is not going to be quite as receptive to that. We really recommend espresso, something you grind just before or a few minutes before you brew. And again, this is depending on your tolerance. So there's all these rules in coffee, rule after rule after rule after rule. And we try to eliminate sort of not the intimidation, but sometimes it seems not very approachable. And so our first rule is don't be ruled by the rules.
Yeah, I like it.
It's just a cup of coffee after all.
And
it's really about your journey getting to drink coffee over and over and over again, is understanding how your tastes change over time and your expectations might change over time. And that's really up to you and what you need out of your coffee. If you're happy with pods or capsules or whatever, keep doing that. We're not going to talk down on those things. It's not my personal preference, but you need to find kind of what fits your overall coffee expectation.
Yeah, makes sense. So real quick on grinders. What are your thoughts on the hand burr grinders?
Hand burr grinders can be absolutely incredible as long as the burr is really good.
Okay.
So that's sort of, and typically your old style, if you go back like 100 years and look at the old Zassenhaus models, which people probably think about, they have what's called a conical burr, where you have a round sort of ball-shaped mill that's encapsulated.
Yep.
And you slowly crank that. And they tend to have slow rotation speed, so you're not generating too much heat. They tend to have long cutting edges. They're very long lasting. I think it's a great way to go. And plus there's sort of some fun ritual to it. And they're usually going to also run quieter. So if you can find a great hand grinder that puts out enough coffee in a time period that you're satisfied with.
Right. Yeah.
Great option.
Yeah, it worked when I was just talking to a friend who was looking for a grinder, and I don't know if I gave him the right. I sent him to what I have, which is the Bodum burr grinder, which was kind of the minimum of what I could find when I was doing my research. Minimum burr grinder, kind of ideal situation, but probably not quite there. Are you familiar with that? It's like $80.
It's been a while since I've looked at
Okay.
We used to sell the Bodum grinders, and it's probably a good way to go. I think, and I would take probably any burr grinder over any blade grinder.
Sure.
If I get a choice between those two.
Yeah. But I had the hand grinder for a little bit, and it worked when I was single. But you're making coffee a couple times a day for a couple people it's much more difficult.
Totally get that.
Yeah. And it is fun. You're right. Like I did it the night before, just kind of as I was going to bed, and it was kind of a nice ritual. And my roommate liked it because it smelled good.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. Okay, so I'll let you wrap up. Anything we're missing? I know we probably didn't get a thorough touch on each aspect there. Anything you wanted to hit on there?
I mean, just the fast summary is if you're trying to go from wherever you're at to really awesome cups of coffee, I would generally recommend get a nice gram scale, get a nice grinder, get a good French press, and find a bag of whole bean coffee that you enjoy. And you're probably into that, probably about $250. And you can now make coffee that's on par with pretty much any local coffee establishment.
That's great. Yeah, that's pretty makes it sound pretty easy there, and makes me think, what am I doing settling here? So
drip coffee is also very enjoyable. I'm still a big fan. Drip coffee is not going anywhere. Our high-end coffee bar clients around the Seattle, Puget Sound area, and even nationally, still brew batch brew. They've given it a cooler name than just drip in the last few years. But batch brew is not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's still enjoyable. Maybe I'll make because it's just it is nice to walk out to already made coffee. So maybe I'll make the French press the afternoon gig.
There you go.
It's a little bit less work than a pour over. Pour over is more involved.
Agreed.
All right, Philip. Well, super helpful, and thanks so much. We'll wrap it up there this week, and looking forward to another conversation in the near future.
Well, sounds great. I hope you have a great day, Landon. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to Work is Good. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone else, leave a review, and listen next week.